Welcome to Quilting with Shar. Today I'm going to share with you my spring table runner using my Wheel of Mystery template set. For this table runner, I have chosen some very cheerful purple, yellow, green, and pink fabrics. Actually, these are all fun batiks to work with. When you look at the table runner, you'll see 3 water lilies throughout the design, and this would be one 6-inch block in here and another one right in here. The water lilies then are separated with this block in here, which has a point coming off of here. And as we go through this project, I will explain to you how these shapes actually work together. It is a simple 6-inch block, and it's only where the color is placed that makes the design. There are 3 pattern shapes that make this design, and I'm going to place them onto the quilt right now so you can see the simple shapes. There's one for the this part of the block. Then we have this one right here, which is the little yellow part. And notice that the seam allowance is included in the pattern shapes, so that makes it very nice to cut them out. And then of course we have the corner of the block. Now those same exact shapes were used in this block over here. It's just a little harder for you to see probably, being it's all purple. This one sits in the corner here, and then this one sits like this. Another very unusual thing about this pattern is that you can create quilts with a scalloped edge like this or with a straight edge. The scalloped edge is created when you use just part of a row. This right in here, the curve, is repeated out in here. And so it is the partial row that creates the scalloped edge along the outside edge. Behind me on the back wall, you'll see the same exact pattern shapes used in a plaid and stripe quilt. When you look at this one, you'll see that I have alternated the light and the dark plaids, and that gives you a very interesting checkerboard effect. Also, if you get a closer look at it, you can see that the quilting on it creates a circle, or you see circles repeated overlapping each other throughout the design, and that's where it gets the Wheel of Mystery name from. The next quilt that I want to show you is my Patriotic Wheel of Mystery. That too has just 2 simple blocks, and I'm going to show you those before you take a closer look at the quilt. When you look at these 2 blocks up in front of me, like I said, it is just 2 simple blocks. This one here has the same shapes that this one has. It just is the place that you put the color that creates the design. When you put them together, then you start to see the design come alive, and then when you take a look at the overall quilt, you'll see that I have just alternated those 2 blocks, and that's what gives you the effect of the Patriotic Wheel of Mystery. Again, on this one, I used a scalloped edge to finish off the outside edge of the quilt instead of attaching a border like I did on the plaid and stripe one. Now, cutting for this quilt is very simple to do. I'm going to use the acrylic templates to do my cutting. And before I do that, I'm going to show you how I straighten my fabric. I am going to fold the yellow batik in half, and we will straighten the edge over here. So we start out with a straightened edge. We'll line up the straight edge of one of the lines on the ruler with the folded edge of the fabric, and we'll straighten it by removing that uneven edge. And then, to prevent disturbing the fabric, I let the fabric ride on top of the board as I turn it around. Now I'm going to lay the template up on top of the ruler so that I can find the width of the strip that I need to cut, and we will just cut off that strip. Now, to save time, I like to cut many layers of fabric at a time, but today I'm just going to cut with the 2 widths, or the 2 fabrics, one folded on top of the other. And again, lay that template up on top of that strip of fabric, and notice that I have those little fabric grips to keep them from slipping when I cut. And we'll just follow the edge of the template, turn the board so that you don't disturb the fabric, and that also will help you keep the accuracy that you wanted. And that's how you cut then those yellow pieces that go into the background of the design. Now the other two shapes that are in the design, again, I'm going to bifold the fabric on top of the small mat board so it's easy to turn my work as I cut. Now this particular piece fits into the corner of the block like this. And so because of that, I want to have the straight of grain on the outside edge of the block. So when I lay the template up on top of the strip of fabric, I want to cut it so that the straight of grain is out here and the bias is in through this part. So we'll lay the template up, turn the board around, and cut around the pieces, and we now have that perfect piece. I guess I have to cut a little bit better there, and that's how easy it is to cut those shapes. Now to save fabric, the next time I lay the pattern shape down, or the template, I will slide it into the corner like that so I don't waste that amount of fabric, and I would cut the next piece. The main part, or the largest part of the design, which lays in the center of the block, is cut a little bit differently. Again, we want to be concerned about the straight of grain of the fabric. So I'm going to lay that template down on the fabric like this. So the straight of grain goes through this part of the piece. And again, we'll just follow the edge, turn the board, and can you imagine how fast it would be to cut if you had 6 layers of fabric on top of each other? And that's how easy it is then to cut the main piece, or all the pieces that go into the Wheel of Mystery. Well, I think I've cut enough now, and we're ready to go put it together. I have a block laid out on by the sewing machine in front of me, so I know exactly the process in which I'm going to put the block together. And I have the sewing machine set at a scant 1/4 inch, and I have an open toe foot on the sewing machine, and I like to use this one because I can see exactly where I'm going, and I don't have a bridge across the foot that will obstruct my view. The first 2 pieces that I'm going to put together would be these 2, and I need to identify the center of each of those pieces. So I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm going to cut a tiny little notch on both of those pieces. Now I don't want to cut it so big that I actually go into the seam allowance, so you want to keep it just tiny. Another way that you could mark this would probably be with a pen or a fabric marking pencil. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is match the centers, and you'll notice that there is a curve on both of these pieces. Now whenever I teach quilting, I always tell the students that you need to put the smile on top of the frown, this being the smile and the frown is underneath. And I find that they remember that a lot easier. So now we will pin in the center, and I use silk pins, and I find that it's a lot easier, or a lot better to have, I get better seams if I do that. Now out here on the edge, all I need to do is match those points, and then we'll put a pin there right at this point, and we'll put one more over here, pinning with the smile on top of the frown. When I start to sew now, I'm going to start sewing on an anchor cloth, and that's just a little scrap of fabric that is folded in half, and I like to do that because the first stitches sewn then on my patchwork will be as strong as my center stitches sewn. After I have made a couple of stitches on my anchor cloth, then I will work on to the patchwork, and I'll just before the pin I'll stop, pull the pin out, and at this point now, because I haven't put any more pins in, I like to use the stiletto to work my fabric in front of the pressure foot. So I will just take that top fabric and scoot it over with the stiletto and make sure that both of those edges are perfectly matched up. And again, like I said, before I get to that pin, I'll stop and pull it out, and we'll continue on. I find that I cannot sew a single seam unless I have a stiletto in my hand. Have you ever had a seam that will scoot off one way or the other at the end? Well, this little tool will help you, will prevent that from happening. I can hold on to that fabric to the very last stitch, and it can go into places that my fingers can't go. Now I'm not doing any back stitching at the beginning or end of the seam, and I'm sewing right off onto that anchor cloth. Now after I have sewn that seam, I'm going to finger press that seam allowance towards the outside corner or the square corner of the block. And if you do that on a hard surface, it's much easier to get a perfect finger press. Then you will do that on the right and the wrong side, and then do take the time to press with an iron. So if you keep the iron right beside you, you're going to be more apt to do that. Now the next part then, of course, would be to complete the sewing of those four corners, but up here I have already got one in progress, so I'm going to pull that down, and we have already put this piece onto this unit right here, which would be this one here. And I'm going to pin that one on another one so you can see exactly how that was done. Again, you're going to put the smile on top of the frown. And because I didn't clip off this little ear down here, I can use that to match it up. So we will put a pin right here. Right in here. And remember I said that little ear, I didn't clip it off. That's going to be a guide for me to match it up. And we'll put a pin in there. And now when we're sewing that curve, see how nice that fits right in? So we will come along here, scoot it over with a stiletto. Stop with the needle down, that way your fabric doesn't get out of place. It'll kind of hold it there until you make the next stitch. And now I just scoot that fabric over. Notice I didn't use but 2 pins to do this whole seam. And we'll just sew off the end. I didn't backstitch at the beginning or the end, and again I'm using that little ear to match down in here, and we sew right off into the crevice. Okay, now what are we going to do with that seam? Well, we're going to finger press it towards the dark part of the block. Again, using the hard surface to finger press on. Now the next unit will come right up into here, and we'll take this one off of the flannel board and bring it down, and we'll be able to connect that next part of our block. Again, we will use that little ear down here to match up this part. Right down in here. And you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to put the smile on top. So we've got to flip this over and pin with this side on top. And I need to take this pin out and put the smile on top. Now when sewing this seam, I'm going to start down here in the crevice, come up into here, and I want to hit this point right in here. That way I will have a perfect point in the center of the block. So now we will start from the anchor cloth, start into the crevice, and I can't stress enough the importance of that scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I say scant because you need to make up for the amount of fabric used in the seam line. Stop with the needle down, and again we'll work that fabric into a match along the edge of the seam. You do not have to ease anything or stretch anything. It'll just fit right in. Remember how I said I want to match this point right up in here. So I'm going to pull that pin out now so I have a better time of working with it. And we now have completed half of the block. Now the rest of the sewing is all the same. You just repeat what I have shown you with this part of the block. And if you look up at the flannel board, you can see it a little farther in progress. I'm going to set this up here so that you can see that unit together. So after you have these halves together, when you look down here, you would just sew this seam in here. These would be connected in here, and then it would go together here. Now if you look across the top of the block, you'll see that I have a row of partial blocks, and that's what created the scalloped border along the table runner. In the center, you'll see that there are 2 different combinations of blocks. One has the green center and one has the purple center, and that's what created the water lilies in the quilt. Also along the outside edge, I did have a touch of magenta to set it apart. Down in front of me here on the sewing machine, I have a quilt a little bit farther along, and I have marked on the top of it with a fabric marking pencil the quilting lines that I wanted to use. I created this stencil specifically for this design because I wanted to make the water lilies look more realistic. So you can see that the quilting does not necessarily follow the lines of the patchwork, but that it creates its own design out in here. And then I added a quilting line in here to top stitch along the edge of the yellow, and so on. What I did to make the quilt sandwich, after you've got your top all pieced, I sprayed the back of the sandwich with a temporary spray adhesive, and then after you've sprayed that down, then you place the batting on top. That way it won't shift as you're quilting. And then I did the same with the quilt top, and that would hold it in place. And I quilted with a walking foot, following the lines that I've marked with the fabric marking pencil. And these wash off very easily with a damp cloth. The outside edge of the quilt was bound with a bias binding, and the reason that you use a bias binding is because you need to follow the curves of the quilt. And whenever you have curves, you need to use bias so that it lays nice and flat. When you attach the binding after it is quilted, then you sew it onto the top side, and the one little tip that I want to share with you is that when you do this, do not stretch the binding, because if you do, you will get bubbles along the outside edge of the quilt. And then of course, after you've attached it to the top side, you just flip it over to the back, and then you've got work to do in front of the TV. I sure hope you've enjoyed watching my table runner go together today, and stay with us because Linda Taylor has machine quilting tips to share with you. Linda's going to show us how to put feathers in the center of our Irish chain today.
Well, this one is an unusual Irish chain because it has a square in the middle, but that is perfect for my circle because it has scores on it. So I don't even have to worry about where that middle is. You see that? I can just line that up with the piecework. And then I'll go down and bring out my thread. I'll move this over to a place where it's going to be out of the way, so don't worry about that thread because I'll cut it afterwards, okay? And we'll turn this on like this. Just keep my fingers around there. Now remember that I have the base on underneath, and that's why I can do this because I have a nice flat surface.
That would be hard to do without that, wouldn't it?
Oh, it would be really hard. Just see that perfect circle around there? Isn't that neat?
So now you're going to build that feather around
I am.
that.
I'm going to put, I'll do my feather in the middle of it first.
Okay.
So we'll do our feathers around the middle like this. This is going to raise that middle part up too. We may want to come back later and put some stipple in the middle.
Sure, like some closer.
And I don't worry a lot about how I'm going to end up over here because I'm just going to tuck the last feather right underneath the one I started with, right there. See that? It just works out that way.
For you.
Now, for the outside, I want to come out and fill in this entire beige area. Okay, so these feathers are really going to reach out like this and fill in the area that they need to fill in. If I need to do a short one in an area, you see, I can do a short one. There's no rules that say...
Oh, that's my favorite.
Isn't that cool? It's wild.
I like that.
So you can reach out and fill whatever area you need to, and then they can be shorter if they're not filling in that area.
Oh, that's great.
This will be really outstanding.
That is really nice.
They're all going the same direction. Just keep them. When you do feathers, you want to do round, and then you want to follow the stem. Round, follow the stem. Round, follow the stem.
Oh, that's neat. That is absolutely
beautiful. It almost
beautiful.
turned out into a square looking.
It kind of does.
It does. In this area, just for something different, we're going to, I'm going to do pinwheels in each one, like this. And you just have to be very careful that you go right through that intersection and you don't miss.
Oh, I have never seen that done before on the Irish chain. Oh, I like that too.
Isn't that neat?
Yes. And you know those curves go so well with the feathers.
Very well with feathers. Very well.
That is nice.
We go all the way around there. And it gives it a really nice dimension, because anything curved is very appealing to the human eye.
Oh, that is beautiful.
Now we also have, and of course we'd finish that, we also have a little tiny border out here, and since we've got the feather theme, we can come out here with just half of a feather.
And use that border as the...
Right.
You know what, that looks like a rope almost.
It does, and yet it's so easy. If you were trying to follow a pattern like that, it'd be hard to set it. In the corner, I'll come straight out like this, and then I'll change direction.
Oh, that is pretty.
Doesn't that look cool?
That is absolutely pretty.
Really.
What will you do then in the corner?
In this little corner, I'm going to do what I call an inside out. I'm going to come in with a little hook like this, and then I'm going to do a patterned meandering on the inside of this little hook like this. Now I'm going to use the outside of that little hook as my guide, and it will reach out to all of the areas in that little triangle that it needs to reach out to. And I'll do one on each of the corners, and it'll look like I set a pattern in there because I'll be doing them all exactly the same way.
Totally different from everything else. I just love that. And this rope is great. Thanks so much, Linda, for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.